9. All right. So, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. So this verse, I know there's a lot of different interpretation and understanding of this. There's a little bit of, I think, disagreement in about how to interpret this verse. So I want to bring you guys the revelation I received from God, and that is 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. It reads, "And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." Again, he said unto me, My grace. So Apostle Paul is speaking here. Apostle Paul wrote this, and he's saying what God told him. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. So, you know what I want to reveal or unravel today about my grace is sufficient for thee. So what is the background story of this? So historically, theologians said Apostle Paul had some kind of issue in his body, right? And he prayed to God multiple times to take this away. But after praying many, many times, what he heard from God is, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. So God told Apostle Paul about his condition, the condition that he's going through, and the condition that he prayed God to take away. But God's response was, my grace is sufficient for you. So I heard many people different take on about this from many believers. Some people said that means my grace is sufficient for you means whatever the challenges you're going through, God said, my grace is sufficient for you. So embrace whatever challenges you have or whatever the prayer requests you have. God is, their interpretation was, God said, my grace is sufficient for you. So everything else, everything I've given you is sufficient for you. Therefore, the challenge that you have right now is it's okay to be in that condition. It's okay to embrace that. Don't complain about what you're going through. God might be teaching you something as you are going through that challenge. Maybe God saw that you need that to for you to get mature or to change your to transform you. So there are so many different interpretations about this verse. My revelation is, you know, there are some, especially those people who need healing in their body or healing in their mind, or people who you have, you know, family members who need healing. And as you pray hard for them, you pray for healing, and you pray that God will heal them and deliver them. And you pray with all your heart and mind and just, you know, with your sincerity, you know, you pray and for a long time without giving up. But then when you don't receive answer to your prayer, or when you don't receive healing, or when you don't receive the breakthrough for what you've been praying for a long time, I want you to receive this God's promise like this. My grace is sufficient for you. That means God's grace. God's grace is abundant. God's grace is powerful. God's grace is lacking in nothing. Therefore, whatever you're going through right now, embrace the current situation, but doesn't mean that you give into that situation. You need to go deeper. You need to ask God more. You need to take it deeper and higher and further, believing that God will bring you the breakthrough. God's grace is sufficient. What does sufficient means? Sufficient means is lacking nothing. If you are lacking health in your life, that is not sufficient. That's not sufficient, right? That means if you are lacking something in your life, then you need to seek God more. You need to go in deeper and closer and more intimate with God until you see the breakthrough. Until you see the breakthrough. Don't give up. Why? Because God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is sufficient enough to heal you. God's grace is sufficient enough to deliver you. God's grace is sufficient enough to take you higher. God's grace is sufficient enough to bring you promotion that you need. All right? In God's kingdom, nothing is lacking. If you feel lacking in any area in your life, then you need to bring God's kingdom in that area, because God's kingdom is sufficient and nothing is lacking. So I wanted to encourage you guys, for those of you guys who especially waiting for breakthrough in the areas that you've been praying for. Don't stop at like, God's grace is sufficient, therefore I'm just going to do nothing. No, there is more. There is more. So you need to go deeper. God has created this body, our body, with amazing power. See, we are all created in God's image. Think about what it means by being created in His image. We are not merely human beings. You thought you were just a human beings, right? You thought you were just a human. Hey, but we are actually more than just a human. All right? We are a supernatural being. And God, we were created in God's image. So, as you go deeper, you'll find more secret and more things, more treasure in God's kingdom. Then what do you have to do? You have to go deeper. All right? And receive and find all the treasures that's in God's kingdom. So I want to encourage you with that. So next week when I come back, I want to hear from you guys how deep you went. Okay? All right. Well, I hope everybody was encouraged today by my message appetizer. And now, who's next? Pastor Israel Love will come up and give us fresh manna for today. And so let's